Package manager for .NET. It fixes several of the problems that GitHub gives, that NuGet gives us. It plays nicely with NuGet.org, and it's also capable of managing other resources other than NuGet packages. So it gives you more flexibility. And where's it come from? It's come from the F# community. There are several people in the F# community very frustrated with several of the shortcomings of NuGet. NuGet said, hey, we're an open source project, so they tried submitting some patches to it, and the NuGet guys basically said, no, that's not a direction we want to go in. So they decided to write their own package manager instead, and Paket is the result. Who uses it? It's the package manager of choice in the F# community. Pretty much every open source F# project that I've come across uses it. Most of the frameworks install it by default. I think it needs, so it's very popular in the F# world, but I think it needs a bit more exposure to the wider .NET community. There are, as I'm about to tell you, it gives you several advantages over NuGet, and you should seriously consider it. So, why? What is better about Paket than NuGet? Well, first off, it actively prevents you from having multiple different versions of the same assembly in your solution. It keeps all the dependencies for the solution in one place, and makes sure that you can only ever use one version at a time. So it will prevent you, for example, from the JSON.NET hell where you have three different dependencies on different versions of JSON.NET. Secondly, it guarantees stable versions of all dependencies. So it tracks which current version of all your dependencies you have installed. It makes sure if you download all your dependencies that it gets exactly the set of dependencies that you've told it that you want. NuGet has a habit of trying to guess and then changing its mind. So it tracks all the dependencies, including transitive dependencies and all the versions there. It stores those in a packet.lock file, and that only changes when you decide to update your dependencies. So that means that wherever you build your project, you're always guaranteed to have the same exact dependencies every time. If you're using something like Cake or Fake, for anyone who came along last week and saw not last week, last month, and saw Gary Ewan Park's presentation about Cake. Packet works very nicely with Cake because you can tell it that these are exactly the dependencies I want for my solution when I build it, and Cake will, and your build file will make sure that they get built. It gives you reliable paths to dependencies. It doesn't store the version number in the dependency path, which is what NuGet does. Again, this is a godsend if you're using build scripts, because it means that you can update, for example, third-party tools that you're using as part of your build script and not have to update all the paths in your build file. So it doesn't store the version number in the path, it stores it in the lock file. It hides all the transitive dependencies for you. You say, I want this version of some particular assembly. It will tell you, it will work out whether that assembly has dependencies on other things. It will work out which version, what the best version to have is. It will track that version and update it when it needs to. If you need to find out why you've got a particular dependency, it will tell you, but you don't have to worry about it unless you want to. And it lets you take dependencies on things beyond NuGet packages. You can take a dependency on a whole Git repository or whole GitHub repository, or individual files within those, and you can lock them down to the individual commit within that particular repository. And the same with gists. So if you've got a particular, this is particularly useful in F# because often you'll have a whole, for example, a whole module in a single file for F#. All you want to do is include that one particular file. You can get the gist of it or a pointer to it in a particular repository, and you can guarantee that you'll always get the same version of it. You can also take an unversioned dependency on any URL you like. So you can just say, here, download me this DLL when I get all my all my dependencies. So what tooling can I use with it? Well, there's a plugin for Visual Studio. There's part of the F# Ionide plugins for Visual Studio Code. There's a plugin for that. There's integration with MS Build and the .NET command line, .NET Core command line tools. There's also support for Atom, Emacs, Xamarin Studio, and Rider. So pretty much if you're doing .NET development and you're using any of those tools, and if you're not using any of those tools, I wonder what you are using, then there's support for it. So can I rely on it? Yes, it's in very active development. There are usually 2 to 3 patches a week at the moment, so people are making minor tweaks to it all the time. For those people who got bitten by the GitHub TLS update the other day, they had a patch out for that within about 4 or 5 hours, I think. It's self-bootstrapping, so it always tries to update itself to the latest version, and you can always get it from Chocolatey. So, are you convinced? Where can you get it? It's at, if you go to the GitHub pages for Paket and follow the links, it's there. And finally, so that's all I wanted to say. I hope I've convinced you. If you want my slides, they're on my GitHub pages. You can look at the sources. Also, I've put this presentation together with a really nice tool called FS Reveal, which is a nice F# front end on JS Reveal. So if anybody wants to look at that, feel free. Okay, thank you.